We're going to go ahead and get started. So it's wonderful to see everybody here. Thank you so much for being here with us, and I want to thank Bryan for being here. I have a very short intro. This is the abridged version. For the full-length version of the intro, please come to tonight's keynote with Bryan Alexander. He'll be talking about storms of change, forces driving the transformation of higher education at 4 o'clock. And Dean Shared from the School of Education will be offering an introduction at that time. And Bryan and I were joking earlier that we came up with this title several months ago, Storms of Change, and indeed things have gotten much stormier since. It's like we were so cute back then, right?
That's really clever. That's really nice.
Yeah. So just a couple of things about Bryan before I let him take it away here. The seed for Bryan's visit to campus was really planted about a year ago when Bryan and I had breakfast at the Eli EDUCAUSE Learning Initiative Conference. And that was a wonderful conversation. We talked a little bit about EdTech, but what I really remember talking about was Spanish and Russian linguistic idiosyncrasies, sci-fi, the trials and tribulations of homesteading in Vermont. So it made me want to talk to Bryan more. But at that conference, I also saw him deliver the 2015, a summary of the 2015 Horizon Report to a full room. And that kind of sealed the deal as far as us inviting Bryan to come to campus, because for me, the exhaustive research that had gone into that, and then Bryan's presentation of that material helped me understand higher ed from kind of a bird's eye perspective and situated the work that we're doing here at Pacific. So a couple of things about Bryan. He has a PhD in English, and he was a faculty member, taught English, multimedia studies, IT studies as well, several other things, I'm certain. He also worked for the National Institute for Technology and Liberal Education, or NITLE, from 2002 to 2014. Which was a really influential organization for digital humanities in particular. In 2013, Bryan started his own consulting business, and he speaks and publishes widely, extensively, on a broad range of topics in higher education. And I'm just going to mention a couple of the things that we have found really influential at the CTL. Bryan publishes a monthly report, the Future Trends in Technology and Education report, that is accessible to you. And for information about that, please talk to us or to Bryan. He also hosts an interactive video forum. Is that weekly?
Yes.
Yeah, weekly, which is a great way to hear about some of these issues. And also Bryan has brought in a really impressive roster of guests for those conversations. He has published the books Gearing Up for Learning Beyond K-12, and also this book, The New Digital Storytelling, which we have a copy of at CTL, and which is the topic of Bryan's workshop here today. Just a quick mention, our CTL calendar of events is available back here, so please grab one on your way out if you don't have one. And I'm sure I missed many important things that Bryan does and has done, but again, come to the keynote tonight and you'll get the full-length version. So thank you, Bryan, for being here.
Thank you.
Without further ado.
That is so kind. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. It's really a treat to be here for a lot of reasons. One is to connect with people, some of whom are friends of mine, some of whom I know online, and just get to meet in person for the first time. Like Mark, who is almost 10 feet taller than I thought he was online. You guys in the back, if I talk like this, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Martin, I'm going to rove back and forth around here. Am I still in good range for the taser? I mean the mic here? Okay. It's a delight to be here for other reasons as well. In my work, I work with hundreds of colleges and universities around the world. And I love learning about campuses. I love learning about how they do everything. So I will interrogate you all ruthlessly about what you do with, I've already been bugging people about their LMSs, about 3D printing here in the library. It's just fascinating for me. It's also good because as someone who lives in New England, coming to California is always this great culture clash. So you can see I'm wearing my black suit. I'm looking kind of stressed out and intense and riddled with anxiety. You know, I'm going to be moving too quickly, and you guys are going to try and say, chill, relax. We're here on the West Coast. Everything is fine, right? What I'd like to talk about with you and work with you about is the idea of digital storytelling. But before I get into that, let me just throw a couple of things up here on the screen, because I love using the screen to show things off. So let's see. We mentioned the National Institute for Technology and Liberal Education, which is an organization up to 200 small colleges and universities around the U.S. So I worked with that for a while, trying to help people use technology in a more productive fashion. If you don't know the Horizon Report, I strongly recommend taking a look at it. It's a free publication looking at the next 5 years of technology and education. I'm biased. I've worked on it for 10 years. The next one comes out in about a week. So you can go here and find out about it if you like. It's a free thing to look at. It's all written in this arcane language called English. It's very, very accessible to people, I find. Now, if you want to know more about me, or if you can't sleep very much, I have a website which tells you all kinds of stuff. My wonderful introducer did a much better job of describing it. But I could point out a couple of things that might appeal to you. My job title is futurist. I work in the future of education, trying to figure out what's happening in this field and trying to help institutions think better about it, trying to think what happens to colleges, universities, higher education, academic publishing, libraries, pedagogy, the student body. This afternoon I'll be talking about that. That's the subject of my talk. But if you'd like to learn more, I do a monthly report. The next issue is on my laptop, ready to go out tomorrow morning, where I take a look at all these different issues and challenges. And if you're a video-oriented person, we do this really, really fun weekly event where we do a video conference. I pick one person who I think is brilliant or fascinating that has something to say or is doing something about the future of education and technology. And we do this on a video platform that anybody can log into and join us and talk about. And we record all of them. So now we have 50 recordings right now, and you'll find Mark and a few other people on there. We talk about everything from the future of the learning management system to changes in faculty development to a multi-campus new project, social justice and liberal education. Most recently, what happens to politics and policy in higher education in the age of Trump. So if you're curious about that, that can help you out. But let's talk about storytelling instead, because storytelling is what we're going to be talking about. And storytelling, I think, is something that you should pay careful attention to, because as dark and horrible as 2017 can be, when we look at everything from politics to finance to bureaucracy to the challenges of education, I find storytelling gives me hope. When I look at what students can do with stories, when I look at the sheer torrent of creativity through stories happening now, that keeps me going. And I have to, in my research, deal with a lot of forbidding stuff, but I think this is a bright light. So, in order to maximize torment, I have a PowerPoint presentation. Actually, this is interesting. I mean, I don't know if I did a research project 10 years ago where I talked to about 250 colleges in the U.S. I said, so, what are you going to do after PowerPoint? And I built this survey instrument. I'm a humanist. When we do things in other fields, it's always a kind of kick. So if I could say, I built a survey instrument, please, I was enjoying myself. and I gave them all these different possibilities. I said, are you using Prezi? Are you using the Mac thing, which is the same as PowerPoint? You know, what else? And people said, what do you mean beyond PowerPoint? Why would we do anything other? And there was no interest. In the past 10 years, there's been zero movement since then. PowerPoint is just with us. It's kind of like oxygen or cholera. We just can't get rid of it. And no one loves it. And if I say to a crowd, we're going to skip PowerPoint today, people leap to their feet, applauding, tears streaming from their eyes. Oh, I'm so glad. But if I show you PowerPoint, people go, yeah, you know. But we don't go beyond it. It's fascinating. It does its job. It does its job. And one of the reasons I use it today is because this has a lot of screen captures. And PowerPoint is an efficient tool for sharing screen captures. So here's the plan. First, we're going to talk about storytelling. What it is, what it does, what it means, and I have an even trickier question for you about that. Then we're talking about digital storytelling, what the heck that means. And I call it classical digital storytelling because it dates back to the 1980s. And then talk about newer forms using new technology, and all this is a prelude to talk about educational uses. So I'm going to be showing you stuff, that's part of it. You're going to be speaking and answering questions and asking questions, that's part of it. Then we'll have a chance to try some different technologies along the way. I know I have a suit and tie and I'm being kind of formal. This is actually very flexible. I've written way too much about this. I've presented on this. I've taught workshops on this. I can't think how many times. So I'm really at your disposal. I just want to show you to get you thinking, and then we'll move around. Any questions about the plan, the agenda? I don't know where the bathroom is, so I can't answer that question. That way? Are we set? Am I missing you? I keep going forward this way, and then you're behind my peripheral vision.
I'm fine if you're okay.
Okay. Okay, so if I miss you or something, like punch Suraj, and then he'll cry out, and I'll hear it. Okay.
That's a plan.
So here's the first thing. Just to put everybody on the same page, is to think about a problem, which is actually a really fun one and a deep one. And this, by the way, is guaranteed to get conversations going. It's like asking somebody, what was your worst educational experience? Or what movie do you love? Ask them, what's storytelling? And everybody thinks about it. And everybody has different ideas. And they overlap and they go back and forth. Let me just get you going on this a little bit. We could dive deeply into literary theory. I'm not going to do that, because that's not fun. It's also not that helpful. But there are a lot of different models that are out there that people have. And by people, I mean everybody. I went to grad school in the humanities in the 1990s, and we learned that there was nothing universal. Everything was a social construct. Everything was deconstructed, all that. But, storytelling is kind of a universal. Even Twilight fans like storytelling. It is something that seems to be universal, that we all partake in. You can come in anywhere. You were trying to sneak in, and now the humiliation is ramping up, so you can sit in the front if you want. It's fine. So here's one of the models of storytelling. This is actually not that old. This dates back to the 19th century. A German theorist named Gustav Freytag came up with this pyramid. And you've all heard this before, right? A story begins with exposition, scene setting, getting the ball rolling. You have rising action, then you have climax, and a denouement. You guys have all heard this, right? I mean, it's pretty classic, and it works for some things. If you don't know this one, you actually do. This is a model which the creator called a monomyth because he was incredibly pretentious. And he had this idea that you could go back, this is a 19th, 20th century project, to go through all the myths and religions of humanity and figure out the kind of DNA among them all. And Joseph Campbell said, there's this one story. It's the hero's journey. And when you hear that, you have to hear capital H, capital J, TM at the end. So it starts off with a hero, yes, it's a male, who is youngish, and he receives a call to greatness, a call to destiny. And he sets out, and along the way, certain things happen. He gets certain implements and tools. There's an older advisor. There's a romantic interest. And he reaches a terrible crisis where everything falls apart, nevertheless perseveres, redeems himself, triumph. Called this the monomyth. Why do you know about it? Hollywood loves this to death. George Lucas had this book on his shelf while writing Star Wars, and you can tell this because this is Luke Skywalker's story, and I'm not going to talk about more recent Star Wars movies, but this is the key thing. And Hollywood uses this. There are actually movies about this. So if you haven't seen Adaptation, I strongly recommend it. It's a cute movie about this. You can go to Hollywood, spend money to become a screenwriter, to apply this to your story idea. And they copy this to movie after movie after movie. It's huge. I'm critical of it, but it has a lot of power. People really respond to this. There are limitations in all kinds of ways, but it really speaks to a personal story, and that matters a great deal. And we can make fun of it in a lot of ways. And we've had our inciting incident, and now we're on the journey, so it seems like we'll be having a crisis any minute now. This quiz was a lot more fun before we got that book on story structure. But this works. Or a story can be a personal story, and it doesn't have to be Luke Skywalker. The personal story can simply be about something that happens to you, something you do. This image, by the way, is a sub-genre of digital storytelling. There aren't many examples of it, but I'll show you a few. It's fake Facebook pages. So this is a pretend Bill Gates page. See, Bill Gates just bought Azerbaijan. Steve Jobs, remember that operating system you made that was awesome? Yeah, neither do I. Steve Wozniak like this, you can have a lot of fun with it. I put this up here because there's no real interesting story in a mythic way for a guy's life, but it's convincing. People like this. People respond to the story about an ordinary person. Now, a group that I've worked with has the idea that stories should be about someone important. That could be you, autobiographical stories, or about someone important in your life, a parent, a child, a mentor. They could be about an important event, a migration, a trauma, a triumph. Or they could be about a job. what you do. Gesundheit. Or about medical disaster. Are you okay? I think you lost pounds with doing that. Are you right?
Oh, yes, thank
Okay,
you.
good. But before I play with it, before I answer definitively what story is, let me ask you guys. When you think of story, what's in it? What makes a story? I'm a recovering English professor, so I'll call on you if you don't answer. Go on. Yeah.
The creative writing program I used to teach in, we broke it down to people in a place where something happens.
Good. People, place, something happens. That's pretty good. That
Drama, or some kind of tension, something unresolved.
What department are you in?
History.
Can I clone you and bring you to places? This is in a very,
very good idea.
in a very practical sense. I'm so glad you said this because this is actually something I find missing when I teach storytelling. This may or may not map onto your experience, and this may or may not be generational, but I find asking people to tell a story, they often tell one without a problem. They tell a kind of. Did you ever see the Kurt Vonnegut speech about story types?
I haven't.
It's hilarious.
It's really good.
Just go. It's like 5 minutes long. It's perfect. It's got Kafka humor in it. It's everything. But he talks about stories that have no action, that they're flat. They have no emotional affect. You know, I walked down the street. I bought something. I sneezed. I took a picture. I did it. But there's no anxiety. And sometimes you'll get students who will make stories that are like that. And you have to force them. It's almost like therapy. You just say, well, what went wrong? You know, what was the struggle? What was the anxiety? What was the challenge? So, yes. Well, a lot when you're talking about having something happening, there's something happening. What else do you need? If you disagree with your colleagues, please disagree. I know we're in California, but I can incite you to violence. Yes, listen.
We need some kind of language, whether it's
Yes.
visual or linguistic,
Yes.
or
Why?
to communicate the story
To an audience.
to an audience. Yes.
Yeah. Well, who's a religion professor working in Egypt? That you, right?
That's me.
So this is, of course, the problem before the Rosetta Stone of trying to understand Egyptian pictographs, right? Is,
Right.
What does this
'Cause
mean?
they're not. Yeah.
Right. So you need to have that shared language.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And when I'm making fun of Twilight, for example, that's which I love doing because it's easy. But one reason is because that's a segmented story that's clearly aimed at a specific market which I don't belong to. Yeah, please.
I think some kind of personal connection, something to humanize it.
What department are you in?
Education.
Excellent. Can you hear her okay?
Yeah.
This is so true. This is so true. And when I ask people what matters about stories, they will say people. And then they'll talk about the connection with people, which isn't necessarily the same thing. You know, so you can have a musical about Hamilton, but it has to actually have that connection to you for it to actually work. Oh, this is good. This is good. Anything else that should be in a story?
One of the things I thought about was that part of that connection within that story, within the structure, somehow within the perspective that's generated, it needs to not only connect, but presumably for it to be a good story, it needs to add value to that person's life, right? So a good story will present something that's potentially deeper. So that's getting into the value of the story.
When you say that person, do you mean the storyteller or the character or the audience?
I mean the audience.
Okay. So that would be. I'm sorry, I didn't get your name.
No, Mark.
No.
Oh,
Jackie.
Yeah.
oh,
So we're
sorry.
talking about that personal connection.
Uh-huh.
When you're talking about personal connection, that's one of those connections to have, is where it adds that value to you.
Yeah.
Right.
So, you know, I might. Here's a story about Bill Gates. Well, maybe something happens that tells me something. I mean, it explains something about Windows, or it inspires me, or depresses me. But it adds that value
Right.
to
Or
it.
it invests me in it somehow, right? By having that.
That's a great choice of words. You're invested in that. Gesundheit. This is a chilly room. Where I live, it's like 20 degrees, so this is like t-shirt weather for me. But please.
I think the emotional effect. And that
Yeah.
It's something that's both emotional on the side of the person writing, and it's
Yes.
emotional on the side of the person reading.
Can you hear her okay? That emotional connection. It has to have that emotion. So value and emotion can overlap, but they're not completely the same. So you can have that emotional connection again, so it inspires or depresses or makes you laugh. To have that connection, and you need to have that shared language. Good.
What
Oh,
about,
please.
what about some kind of transformation
Of.
of the character? Like the person in the story should be
Yeah.
somewhat different at the end
Yeah.
than they were at the beginning.
Well, what department are you with?
Sociology.
Excellent. Sociology? Just saying that, isn't it? I don't know. There's got to be some kind of terrible story behind this, right? Absolutely. You need to have the transformation. There's the character who doesn't change at all. Have you ever heard of the term Mary Sue?
Yeah.
This started off in fan fiction, and now it's a popular term for a character who is perfect, invincible, and never changes. And people all hate the character, and we love making them. And they tend to look a lot like ourselves. But they don't change, and that's why it's a criticism. That's why it's a problem. And that ties in part to the idea of a challenge or having emotional impact. Something has to change in a person to give us that connection. Yeah, please.
I just wanted to say more about Lot's initial point about setting.
Yeah.
What's really important to me when I talk to our students is the richly detailed, either characters or setting that can take you there.
Yeah.
Right? That
Yes.
can activate your imagination and take you there.
What history do you teach?
Well, I teach mainly the Chinese history, world history. Those are probably the two main fields. Japan.
Is that all? I mean, yeah. That's
Yeah.
So you're trying to take someone to Tang Dynasty China,
Right.
and you have to establish that in their mind.
That's
the
right.
setting.
Right.
What's different, and the human connections, but also the radical differences.
Right. And even if it's early 20th century U.S. history,
Very
to
different.
take people there,
Yeah.
to really take them there, to get to know that place,
This is by
it
the
takes rich detail.
It
a lot
does.
of detail.
It does, and the emotional connection can make that happen, and the shared language. This is, by the way, so far the biggest appeal of virtual reality is that setting,
Right.
because you can get plopped in a place, and so there's. Does anyone here have agoraphobia? Okay, you do. A little bit. Okay, well, I'll make this mild. There's a New York Times virtual reality level where they have two construction workers climbing up a spire, top of a building, and it's 360-degree visualization. So you can look around with them, and you can look up, and you can look down. So don't do it. But that setting is so powerful. I mean, it's very richly realized. That so far is the leading storytelling power of VR. So for history, I think that's a kind of no-brainer. Please, I thought you had your hand up.
Well, I was thinking I was going to raise my hand, so maybe you intuited that.
I'm good.
Implied in a lot of people's comments, but maybe worth making more clear, is audience. I mean, I was tossing around in my head. I guess you don't actually need an audience to write a story, but for a story to be successful, you need an audience. And in order for a story to be successful, you need to understand your audience in order to have the personal connection or to invest them.
Absolutely.
So audience, I think, is pretty interesting to think about in connection with this idea.
Mike, what department are you in?
History,
And what part of history is yours?
U.S., women.
Excellent. Do you know the Women Writers Project? Out in, it was in Brown, and now it's at Northeastern. It's fantastic. Just Google that, and then you can just leave me alone. I mean, it's so rich. but this is a wonderful thing to think about, because if you lose that audience, I mean, this is a rhetorical problem and also a communication problem. Then it doesn't work at all. And you can think how audiences change over time too. I mean, you think about humor and how that differs. You take a look at, say, comedies from the 1980s, and now a lot of them misfire. That's only a few years, right? Much less to go back to, say, 1840, or, I mean, when I teach Edgar Allan Poe, I keep trying to tell people he's funny, and no one believes me. I mean, I'm just wrong that way, I guess, because he is funny. He's a satirist. He's hilarious. He's a punster. But a century and a half away, it's hard to make that connection. Well, I'm so glad you brought that up. Let me add one more thing to the mix, because I have an elegant definition, and then the one I actually use. A question I have about story, and one of the ways I think it actually works, is by a sense of mystery. And I don't mean a murderer, detective, or Lehman Brothers. No, I don't mean that kind of mystery. I mean just a sense of you don't know what's going to happen next. Let me just give you a couple quick examples. This is a classic opening line from science fiction. The last man on Earth sat alone in a room. There was a knock at the door. And you can't help but have a little when you hear that. Whoa, who is it? Is it a Martian? I mean, and this is parodied extensively. People make a third line. So if the last woman says, "What are you doing in there all by yourself?" Or, "It is a Martian," and so on. But that little frisson you feel, that little bit of weirdness, it makes you want to click to the next slide. It makes you want to read the next paragraph. It draws you in. You don't know what it's going to be. One of my favorite examples, by the way, has anybody Well, you mentioned you taught creative writing. Anybody else here teach creative writing in any kind of way? If you write yourself, if you ever feel bad about your writing, go to the first page of the manuscript for 1984. You can find it online. It is so crossed out so many times. There's like 13 different versions of it. I mean, it's meticulously done. Here's the first line. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Oh, I love that. Because you think, 13? I mean, and you can tease this out. You can say, oh, that first clause, it's a joke on Chaucer with the first line of Canterbury Tales. Or 13 must be military time. But that first little shock of how can a clock strike 13 of all times, it makes you want to click the next slide. It makes you want to find out what's happening next. How many of you recognize this line? Yeah. Any men recognize this line? I think like once a year, a male recognizes this line on my shows. Last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again. It's the first line of Daphne du Maurier's great novel, Rebecca. And I remember I first read this when I was about, 12. And I thought I had a defective copy of the book. I said, again? What's the matter? Did I miss a page? How could this be? I want to read more. And it draws you right in. And time again, great writers will do this. They'll hook you with that little sense of mystery. You know, the great Franz Kafka opening line. Gregor Samsa woke one morning, turned into a bureaucrat. And you want to learn how this happened. You can do it with other media. So you can do it visually, for example. This is from the 1740s. It's a wonderful series of bizarre drawings called Imagined Prisons. And one of the things I love about this is there's no easy boundary. Excuse me. All these galleries, they just go off in the distance. There's no clear, this is the end. And they mesh in different odd ways. The eye is drawn to them to lure you on. You can't quite feel the end of it. You want more. You can do this with maps. You know, famously, Here Be Dragons, right? Which lead you on. You can do this with music, where you can take a tone, move it up half a pitch, stop, and the audience wants you to do the next one. That sense of mystery, it doesn't define stories, but I think it's crucial to storytelling. And if you don't have that, if you don't elicit the desire in the audience to advance, they'll be bored. This is, by the way, how to make your PowerPoint more interesting. If your audience knows what the whole thing is, they're not interested. Yeah, please, Bryan.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting sort of thing to think about that the generation of mystery. We were just talking about television before up in the Center for Teaching and Learning, and we see that a lot of new shows like Breaking Bad will start off by putting you directly sort of at the end of the story or sort of towards the end of that story, and or really answering a few things that will come up. Yet it is because you want to know how on earth anyone would ever get to that point.
Exactly.
That actually breaking the mystery generates more mystery, or at least generates sufficient to drive people through. So even if you're giving it away, you need to give it away in a manner that generates some mystery.
Walter White is standing there in his underwear. How did that happen? Or the U.S. enters World War I. What a strange thing. How did we get there? Okay, you spoil the story, you tell them the end, but how do we get there? You can, absolutely, and you can play this in many ways. Now here's a trickier question. So when you talk about storytelling, we run the risk of saying everything is storytelling. You know, we say that it's communication, it's language, it's connection, it's people, and you think, well, what are we leaving out? We can kind of fold storytelling into all of communication. But not all communication is story. So let me ask, what's outside of storytelling? You can't say Twilight because I already made that joke. Yeah, please.
Procedures. So that's something where it's just, this is this list of events. I'm thinking, so I'm thinking of a number of things within, my field was chemistry, so there's a number of, journal things. It doesn't tell you the story of how these things happen. It just says, this is what happened. This is, and there's no emotional content. There's not, if you just took, that massive section, the rest of it wouldn't be worth reading. It's that part at the beginning, the part at the end that makes it a story.
And there's a language hack that makes it even less of a story, which is it's in passive voice. Right? So the beaker was ignited, the chemical was added. There's no person doing it in language. You have to infer it. Right? So it's kind of mysterious. So yeah, procedures are good. You think legal procedures or policies? Yeah, good. Please.
Far too many textbooks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What department are you in?
Education.
I hear you. I mean, how many people love textbooks? Right? It's a rare thing. And one of the reasons is because they rarely tell stories. They don't make that connection. They don't make an emotional connection. They usually take the transformation out. What else? What else do we leave off a story? We have procedures, we have textbooks. What else is beyond the pale of the story?
Sleeping.
If I knew what that was, I'd die. But no, but sleeping, but again, but you think of dreams.
Right.
But
Dreamless sleeping.
right. That's the void, it's the downtime. Nothing's happening. Good.
Wouldn't you even say a story would be when you just have a snapshot and you don't have any movement?
Nice. So you think, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, but there's one that's static, it's not doing anything.
Yeah, and I wasn't literally thinking like camera picture, but
Okay,
just
okay.
just even information.
Mhm.
That at one point in time, I don't see how that can really be a story.
But can't the story be
I don't know.
upon it?
Huh?
Can't the story be put upon it?
Yes, definitely, but I don't know that that's the story. I don't know.
But that's part of where the work is done. I'm sorry?
I think it depends on the picture.
Hmm.
I'm thinking of a lot of Norman Rockwell
Yes.
pictures, for example.
Yes.
And they do,
Yeah.
in just that one picture.
The I can't think of the name of it. I think it's called Democracy. It's the one of a guy standing up at a town meeting. And he looks kind of nervous, but he's still talking. It's from the 40s. And you have to wonder, who is this guy? How did he get to that point? And there's a kind of process that the objects evoke that we get to do. And an object, a snapshot, we can do the work on top of it. So if you tell me 3:55 p.m., okay, there's no story there. That's a datum, right? That's a point. But then I can say, well, what happened at 3:35 p.m.? Or why is she telling me this? Or then we add to it.
Yeah, and as an applied statistician, I wasn't thinking about a Norman Rockwell. I was literally thinking about like a descriptive data
That was
point.
my next
Yeah.
question was what department you're in.
Yeah.
So
I'm
it's
in education, but it's applied
sure.
research method. So.
Oh, absolutely. When I ask this question, usually a humanist will say data is not story. And then a scientist will say, that's wrong, and then they fight, which is a classic battle, right? But you can really have, but in part that comes back to audience. So for a humanist who is afraid of numbers, or data, or science, there's no connection there, right? It doesn't work for them. There's no emotional transformation or character transformation. But for a statistician or a scientist or anybody for whom that works, 93 million miles, that tells me something. I can work with that. Yeah, please.
I'm sorry, I think maybe what you were saying and what I was hearing is it's dependent on your life experiences, your context, and what I'm viewing that in, whether it's a set of descriptive statistic data or Norman Rockwell, it's all going to be influenced by my life experience.
It really is. Now, you're in education, so you know, and everyone here who teaches knows that when you meet students online or face-to-face, you're desperately trying to get a sense of that life background and that connection, right? And you do things to try and suss that out, from quizzes to just small talk to asking them things. I used to ask my students what movies they'd seen, because they never had literature in common, ever. One exception, they all had the Goosebumps books. But I guess about a movie, and it was likely that most of them would have seen a certain movie, and I could use that then to base. But even now, I mean, I can make a joke about Vermont weather, and that tells you something about me, but also your responses tell me something about you in a little way, and you have to build that up. There's the audience you're talking about. I mean, audience itself is a mass concept. You're talking about the personal. These two are really, really the same thing. So when we're talking about story, this has depths to it, and it crosses all kinds of domains, including sociology. Don't laugh. Please, Mark.
I wonder as well that, I mean, one of the things that I sort of looked at as a history and philosophy of science, and so when you think about the inverse square law. That was where I went to, and you said, what isn't storytelling? Thinking, what is the inverse square law? How
Yes.
might that work, right? Because it's a little bit, it's an analysis of data. It's a description of the world.
Yeah.
But I wonder the extent to which whether or not it's a story depends on whether or not we believe in natural law, whether we believe that nature works by laws that are immutable, because that. If that is an immutable natural law, then that description may exist beyond the context of any audience or any personal connection. But if we don't, then we see that in its more historical context of like Newton and the sort of development of knowledge.
And we can let's go back to the Warring States period in China, which doesn't have this kind of conception of cosmology, right? Or let's pick a part of society that doesn't see that as valuable.
Right.
When you said that, my first reaction actually was to think about teaching videography and audio recording, which is how the distance away from a microphone works by that by square law. So that's one of the reasons why you have to get really, really close to a microphone in order to have that impact. But that's not a story. That's just it's almost a procedure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a procedure that could be turned into a story.
And then we come back to that action again. So when you guys are in education, when you're as educators, in whatever capacity, you want to think about the materials of your work, your curriculum, your field, and think of what operations to perform on it to make it more story. And we've been talking about all those different ways. One more question, then we got to move on.
Oh, I was just going to ask whether, and really this question I'm asking what we think of that web tool Storify, right? Which lets you, collect all the tweets on a certain hashtag, and you can add in links to other websites and other stuff. Because I was like, is a Twitter stream? Because I've got Twitter going on in the background here. I'm like, is a Twitter stream a story? And that immediately led me to that. And it's people putting it together in a certain way. But sometimes it's just like, they just grab the stuff off the hashtag, and sometimes they're adding things to make it more. But it's called Storify, right? The tool is called Storify. And I don't know if that's a story or not, but that clearly people are thinking that there's some connection to storytelling.
I have slides on that coming up.
Oh, sorry.
So, no. This is perfect.
Spoiler alert.
No, exactly. No, this is perfect. I mean, can a Twitter stream be a story? Absolutely. Can a Twitter account be a story? Definitely. And then with Storify, you get to mix them up and put them together. If you haven't seen this, Storify is a tool. This is going to sound complicated. It's really easy. Even for technologists, it's easy. It just lets you go out into the web and grab chunks of YouTube or Facebook or Twitter or one other, Instagram, and drag them into a pile for a sequence. So I do these weekly video conferences, and we have a Twitter hashtag. People sometimes tweet like mad about that. So I'll just go open this up, look for all the tweets about them, pull the interesting ones into a pile, hit publish, bam, there's a sequence right there. It's actually easier to do than it is for me to describe.
Yeah.
And they picked the term Storify because we love the term story. You're going to add more.
Oh, no, I was just going to, I think it's an interesting question, and I was trying to wrap my head around it, and Carrie kind of pointed it out, like the present moment or life as we experience it is not a story.
Right.
Until later, until we know what the end is, in a sense.
Do you know there's a classic Edith Wharton ghost story called Afterward?
Mm-hmm. I don't know that one.
It's perfect. It's an evil little story. But a couple buys a haunted house, and they say, well, it's haunted? And the real estate dealer says, yeah, but you won't know it until afterward.
Right.
And they won't explain it. Oh, you have to read the story, and you'll see it's a little sting. But it's Douglas Fairbanks, I think, one early American Hollywood actor said, Hollywood movies are like real life with the boring parts left out. So then afterwards, you cut out all the stuff.
Right.
Well, let me just push forward a little bit because I'm going to get to the digital part. Oh, please go ahead. One more question.
I was just going to ask.
Yes.
Can you have a story that doesn't have an ending, that is like a to be continued?
Yeah, I think absolutely. In part because depending on the audience, what their expectations are. I mean, cliffhangers work. Everybody hates them, but they always work. And they go back to the 19th century, and people do this with printed stories. Charles Dickens would do this all the time. And we love that. But also, sometimes we can read into a story and then stop. So you think about, say, a series of books, or even a textbook. You don't have to read the whole thing. You don't necessarily have to have the end of the short story you can stop part of the way in. Partly it's a matter of the audience. That's a great question. So this is stuff which works for, I think, everybody. If you talk to kindergartners, you talk to retirees, you talk to Republicans or Democrats, it doesn't matter. People are interested in this, and we all know story. Well, let me advance a little bit further. Here's my bad definition. You can always tell a failed definition because it's so damn long. And this is one case. It's a grocery list, and you've heard all this before. For a given audience, so there's the audience part again. A story is a sequence of content. So that's part of. I'm sorry, I didn't get your name.
Rochelle?
Rochelle, thank you. When you're talking about the snapshot, here's a key. Not literally a snapshot, but here's the key thing: is the sequence of content. It has to unfold over time. Anchored in a problem, which engages that audience with emotion and meaning. So you guys already know about this. So why digital technology? Why are we putting these together? Pretty much because every time humans invent a new communication technology, we invent a new way of telling stories with it. And you can go back and look at every transformation. So for example, you can think about radio. Back in the 1920s, we had this huge renaissance in radio theater in the US. Fantastic stuff, because you could do things. It's called the theater of the mind. My grandfather was a radio announcer. I'm pretty obsessed with this stuff. If you actually go online, really devoted people have taken old recordings, like wire recordings and 8-track, and digitized them so you get classic radio plays, which are fantastic to listen to. If you think about, say, television, in the 50s and 60s, we had to turn it into a new storytelling medium, which is why we had soap operas, which are a huge hit, or telenovelas, or episodic TV in general. You can even think about long-playing records. Remember the concept album? Like, The Who's Tommy, or Pink Floyd The Wall? The technology had to change to let you play something that long. If you only have singles, for example, you can't make all that work. Science fiction, actually, and mystery changed because of this. In the 1900 to 1940 or so, the preferred form of science fiction and mystery stories was the book, the hardcover book. And then it shifted to short stories when we had pulp fiction, we had cheap magazines. After that, it changed to paperback novels. So if you track these genres, writers really worked in the novel, and they shifted to the short story, then they went right back to the novel again. So the technology changes how we do things. And so it was only natural, you can think of millions of examples, really. It's only natural that we invented digital technology, that we tell stories with it. And let me tell you a few, let me point to you a few, and then you'll see. You already know this, because you've already experienced this. In the 1990s, people started doing things with the early web. They had hypertext storytelling, and there are a lot of different ways of doing this. They were browser-based, so you would look in a browser and see the part of the story. They're sometimes connected with offline content, be it music or even physical textbooks, and they were evanescent. They would just disappear because they weren't permanently maintained. And we had other versions too. This is why spam works so well. The Nigerian story is a story. Yeah. All the little urban legends you get are stories. The guy with the hook for a hand, the call from inside the house, Bill Gates will give you money, the Mrs. Fields cookies, those are all little stories. This is a screenshot, by the way, from one of the great websites of all time, Snopes.com. It's an urban legend debunking site. It's fantastic. If you're interested in American culture, this is a great thumb on the pulse of us. Also, if you're interested about fake news, these guys have a perfect bullshit detector. They're really, really good at this. And you can find tons of these little stories circulating around the world. We did this artistically in the 80s and 90s. There was a company in the 80s called Eastgate that made hypertext authoring tools. So you could click on this, click on this, click on this to go through stories. In the 90s, you had projects like, many of them. This is one called Dreaming Methods. It's a British project where you would get an object like this. This is a bunch of inboxes. And each of these would be a different part of the story, so you would click through them to get different parts of the story. Kind of like a choose your own adventure. This is probably my favorite example of this. Welcome to Pine Point. You guys have seen this? Let me bring this up because this is crazy rich. And this is a kind of counterintuitive story. Let's see if it lets me do it. I think it's working. Welcome to Pine Point is a personal story of memory and location.
Mouse click. 579. Click.
It's not a movie.
Mouse click. Backspace 10.
It's a kind of scrapbook of memory of a town in Canada. And it lets you walk your way through it. This is huge. I'm sorry, I don't have time to walk you through this, because this is taking like half an hour easily to go through. There's no real plot. There's just life. This small, unremarkable Canadian town. Well, one thing happened. A Soviet space capsule crashed on it. That's about it. So this is a web page.
That's one thing that was.
It uses multiple forms of media.
Just the sports that was there. We played sports 12 months of the year. You know, hockey and the
very good sound bites.
Volleyball
and you can work your way through it.
In the summertime.
Clicking at different parts of it.
I mean, you've got.
It's a story. Yeah, please.
So, one thing I think about a lot is kind of meta narratives in our culture, and so like I really love this. I've never seen this before, but part of what I think makes it compelling is that we have this narrative of kind of this is Canadian, but like small town Americana.
Yeah.
The quote unquote real America, very white, very innocent, and so part of the reason that this is compelling is that it articulates with a certain kind of privileged narrative about what a good life is. And so I guess to me, like, I'm always thinking about power in society. I'm a sociologist, right? And so thinking about how does this kind of storytelling shore up a certain kind of power or
dive into
usher in a certain kind of power.
Wow, shoot, there's so much in it. I mean, the town basically decays and kind of goes away. So it's a story part about the erosion of power, but then why that happened, you have to pull through the story to figure this out. Part of the economic, it's like an early Rust Belt story in some ways. But yeah, these stories are saturated with power. I mean, Foucault taught us this. Sociology is all about this from Weber on up. But the meta narrative is really important. I think that's part of connecting with a specific audience is realizing this. When I show this to a U.S. audience, they're going to miss a lot because they're not Canadian. Right? Much like if I show a California story to someone in Florida, there's a little gap there. I mean, the terrible, bitter, ancestral hatred between Los Angeles and San Francisco, for example, doesn't really occur to anybody outside of California. It's just not. It's just not a big deal. The state where I live, in Vermont, you remember when Governor Dean ran for president? Yeah. Back in the day, when he conceded, the first thing he did was he told a joke about New Hampshire. No one covered it. Because it made no sense to anybody. It was an okay joke, but you have to know like the White River Valley so to have that meta narrative to engage that, you have to have that connection, or you have to be trained by a good sociologist to spot them. Absolutely. Here's another kind. This is informally called the snowfall method. If you haven't seen this, let me just bring up the best known example. Oops. Wait a sec. This is let's see. There we go. This is a single web page, and almost none of this is really modern. This is a story, and you could buy this in the New York Times Sunday magazine. It's a story about a skiing accident that was pretty bad, pretty epic. But take a look at this carefully. You see how this is animation? The snow moving? Watch this. When you scroll through the story, you get this nice effect. It's a long story. It's a detailed story. But all the multimedia is embedded in the right spot, like a book where the illustrations are where they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
So here is talking about one person who was buried in snow.
I had
and it's discussed
no
right here.
ability to control what was happening to me. I was being tossed over and over and over. It was like,
so here's that personal and that emotional connection. And the more you go through, this is huge. See what it does here with the light? Watch this.
Yeah. Wow.
Is this cool? Yeah, it's cool. It's handy because look at, you see the tags, high waisted?
Yeah.
It is, but also because this is actually hard to understand when you're reading it, because the terrain is so, it's not simple, it's pretty complex and broken up. So this visualization actually tells you a lot, and it appears right there. And you can just keep scrolling down. And you get historical photos, more video. They call this the snowfall method because the story is called Snowfall, but also like a snowfall, it goes down the screen. It's a web page. It's a multimedia web page. Nothing really too new, except this really works.
So I have a question about that though, because like when I see stories that are written like that, and I never watch the videos because I'm engaged in the narrative, and I just want to keep reading, and I always or I hit play on the video, but then I keep reading, and I'm only paying attention to one or the other. Like for me, that kind of storytelling actually doesn't work at all.
Well, or not all of it works, just that one part that you get, because you read the narrative.
But the snowfall method, what you're saying is the embedding of the video and the visualization in the narrative, right? Where I would probably be more attuned if it was just a video or just a narrative.
So just the text or just the video?
Yeah, and certainly like having the snow behind it is cool, right? That I don't find distracting.
Oh, this is perfect.
But like for me, like that actually is not. Like I'm not ADD enough for that to be a way to tell a story, not to use like a processing disorder as a metaphor, but like I don't I don't know. Yeah. I wonder to what degree is that effective, or is that just like, oh, we have these cool tools, let's use them. This
is where the work of story comes in, where you're trying to figure out the audience and how they respond to it. And so we'd have to, if you were making a document like this, you'd have to think about your audience. To what extent are people like you who want one medium at a time? You know, I want that audio file, I want that video file, I want that photo, I want that text. And to what extent are they multimedia, or people who synthesize this? So that's a test to ask. And you think about your students in your sociology classes, or if you're doing this for publication, to think about your audience. It really depends. And what we know of the audiences now, it's all over the map. I mean, I can't give you a quick answer for that. But thinking about the audience, this is communication, what we have to think about.
I was just wondering if you know from your research whether like the extent to which, okay, how many people click on a link like this? How many stop reading once they realize that it's like 10,000 words? And then how many of them actually click on these sort of subsidiary things? Because I think you could get a sense of like what percentage of the New York Times readership is actually interested in engaging in that multi-dimension, and to what extent potentially are little bits and pieces of other media now needed, because very few people will sit down and read a 10,000 plus word story. What
we know of Americans reading is a real mess. We really don't have a good sense. Most of the surveys and most of the research is, some of it's just awful. The NEA did a great study about 10 years ago where they said that no one read anything online. Thanks, guys. We don't know. I mean, we have eye tracking studies on how people parse digital content, but only for certain types of digital content. So you know about the F pattern in web design? So we tend to read a web page by looking at the vertical left column and then move across. It's interesting. But we don't know how people watch Netflix videos, for example. I mean, I will often watch Netflix and I have a laptop nearby so I can look up something that I'm watching. That's just me. I'm a freak that way, all right? But I haven't seen good audience metrics or analysis that breaks this down yet.
But that's surprising. I mean, Google keeps analytics on all these kinds of things. Like the New York Times has that data.
But they haven't. Neither of them have shared a lot of this. And Google, because they're fairly secretive. And the New York Times, because they're still experimenting. They're still throwing things. I mean, they keep doing the snowfall method. This is one of the story about someone going from St. Petersburg to Moscow across Russia. And I don't know if this would be different for you. They had the map of their location constantly updated depending on where you go in the story. And so that can be, for me, I like maps, that's pretty handy. I don't know if that would work for you, depends. It's kind of like footnotes, right? But they haven't shared a lot of information about this. Now, one thing that you guys could do, to some extent, depending on where Canvas goes, or depending on what e-textbooks you use, is to be able to track how your students progress through different documents. And that's an interesting metric. I'll set privacy aside for now. We can come back to that. That's an issue. but this is something to wonder and to think about. You can do this with Kindle. Hang on one second.
Yeah.
With Kindle ebooks, you can annotate and then share your annotations to the world. So you can turn on a Kindle ebook, and it will tell you how many highlights have occurred in certain things. My son and I were reading Huck Finn, and it's fascinating for me just to see, I'm not an American to see what passages people highlighted and what they didn't, right? It was an interesting kind of, not the rigor that you're talking about, but still giving me a sense of that. But please.
Yeah, I was thinking about Allison's comment in light of the...
You're Allison.
Yes, in light of the examples that you just showed.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think storytelling is manipulative.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of
Absolutely.
us, so reading in a digital realm with the added features of multimedia, I'm wondering if, someone like me, I might be suspicious of additional digital content. For me, less so than a video. If they included music and it was elegiac and I'm reading about the tears would start falling.
So you wouldn't be suspicious at that point?
I'm sorry?
You would not be suspicious at that point. The music would work for you.
No, actually, if I started hearing it, yes, it would do what it was supposed to do. So I may turn that off again just to read that story, and it still might make me weep. But there, I think we have a certain susceptibility to additional visual content or oral content that again works so deeply that is beyond our control.
What department are you in? You're in
this one, the library.
And what part of the library are you?
Well, I'm the humanities library.
Excellent. Do you do reference?
Yes.
Less
and less so, unfortunately.
I understand. I'm a ridiculous library fanboy. Last year, I got to keynote the New York Public Library Association conference. I was just like, But what you said is so important. If we just say something about this, and is it Allison?
Yeah.
Okay, let me just bring this together, and then we need to push on a little bit. Is multimedia is very, very complicated and interesting in terms of how audiences respond. So in the 19th century, we have the German opera theory, Gesamtkunstwerk, of a total unified work of art. So you go to an opera, you hear the singing, you see the costumes, you can read, if you will, the libretto, you can look at the design of the backdrops, and it's a total unified thing. And the best version of this, of course, is What's Opera Doc with Bugs Bunny, right? Which shows you that, kill the lad, but that summons all those together and it synthesizes. That's the goal. But sometimes we look at multimedia and we pull it apart. It's like when you start learning music for the first time and you listen to this song, oh, that's the drummer. That's the bass. No one likes the bass. Here's the singer. You can pull this apart in different ways and you can experience it and listen in different ways. We're still not completely sure how this works with digital media because we're making it up as we go along. And we're not quite sure what people perceive. Film studies, for example, serious academic discipline, almost a century old, has this problem. Its Achilles heel is sound. The guys who founded film studies were all literature people and photography people. So they looked at text and images, but they never listened to sound. So the soundtrack, sound effects, the recording of voices, doesn't appear, and it's still a problem in film studies to this day. So they kind of they hear it, but they don't hear it. And you see this when they look at computer games, which often have Hollywood actors now doing the voiceovers, and the soundtracks are professional and beautiful, but we don't talk about them. So there's this interesting problem when you do multimedia, and it's a fascinating problem. When you guys have your new media studies unit that will be living in this building, this is the kind of thing to think about. And as teachers, when you're making stuff, you want to ask your students and stalk them a little bit and see how they unfold and look at your own experience. Your experience there of just wanting to focus is a great example of that. I would give you the example of Spielberg, a director who drives me crazy in part because he never wants you to think at any point in any of his movies. He wants you to feel, and he makes sure that you will feel something. So he'll show you something, he'll tell you how to feel, and the soundtrack will explain exactly how to feel, and you can't get out of that. It's
Score of Say it for me, please.
Schindler's
List.
Yeah.
Perfect example.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna
Or even Indiana Jones. Or his terrible comedy, 1941. Oh, that's bad. 42, thank you. I mean, but he tries to have it so you can't escape. So he doesn't want you to stop the video and just leave. So you want to think about this. There's more. Here's a simple example. My background, by the way, my dissertation was on Gothic literature. My students love my Gothic literature class. That's what I'm kind of known for writing about. So if you're interested in scary stories, I'm your guy. I think they explain a lot about life. And of course, our president. But I want to give a couple examples that are actually scary stories, and here's one. This is a Web 1.0 1990s story. It's called Ted's Caving Journal. And does it look ugly? Oh yeah, check out, see the angel fire banner on the top? And the black background with a white font? Yeah, this is classic stuff, right? So this is a diary, and you can tell it's a diary because you see the date there, 3/23/01. Right? It's about a guy who's a caver, he's a spelunker, so he's found a new cave. Oh, that's awesome, this is a big deal for cavers. And no one's ever been in this cave before, so he checks it out. And you click the bottom, he tells you about this experience, and how exciting it is, and he's got rope, and his dog is with him. And then he tells you about it, click here for the next entry, like turning the pages in a diary. But as you go on, things get creepy. There's a reason no one's been down there. And his dog gets really upset. And at the very, very end of it, he says, oh yeah, I found what's going on in that last chamber. And I solved all the problems. That voice we heard, we'll take care of it all. We'll see you next time. Click next. There is no next page. But it's a story. It's a sequence. It really works as a kind of campfire story. And it pulls out some of the multimedia features too. So it's multilinear in that you can page back and forth. I mean, almost all media are multilinear in a radical way. If I'm reading Shakespeare's Henry V, I can go backwards and forwards in the book, right? If I'm watching a movie, not in the theater, but on my laptop or my TV or whatever, I can press pause and rewind it and go back and forth. And I have that feeling when I'm in movie theaters to this day. I want to pause something, right? But it's also multimedia. Not great multimedia. Here's a photo, right? But it is multiple media. And it's a serial. It goes over time. We've had fun with these. This is a cute one. This is, okay, different audiences at different times. This is a 2008 joke. Dear American, I need to ask you to support an urgent business relationship with the transfer of funds of great magnitude. I am Ministry of the Treasury of the Republic of America. My country has had crisis that has caused the need for a large transfer of funds of $800 billion US. I'm working with Mr. Phil Graham, lobbyist for UBS. It's a financial crash joke, but it's based on the Nigerian spam idea. You can find a similar one from 2003, which says, I am Minister of the Republic of America. I am Dick Cheney. I would like you to invade Iraq. I mean, you could do a lot of this. And also the 1990s came something different, which was the idea of using video to tell stories. Now, that's not new. We've been doing that ever since we've had video. But a group of theater activists in the West Coast, moving between LA and San Francisco, wanted to see what would happen if you give video tools to anybody. So not Hollywood, but literally anybody, and have them tell a personal story. They worked on this for a while, they came up with a curriculum, it's been a hit ever since. And the guys who came up with this are called the Center for Digital Storytelling, and they actually had a physical center for a while in Berkeley. And they came up with a curriculum, they came up with pedagogy, and it simply works like a charm. Here's the way it works. You get 3 days, 3 full business days. And anybody, so not Martin, not myself, but just anybody off the street, starts off with a story. That's all they have to bring. The story should be personal and largely autobiographical. So I first did one of these in 2003, and it was a story about a book that scared the heck out of me when I was a little kid, and how I found the book as an adult. It's a personal autobiographical story. They teach you how to record a voiceover, which is by far, by the way, the hardest thing to do. People hate this. Remember how when you first heard your voice on an answering machine, you hated it? It's like that, but worse. So people have to write down a story, record the story, and then put that into a video editor, add images, and you build a movie out of this. It takes about 3 days. And it is a very, very powerful curriculum. At the end of it, people end up with a roughly 3-minute digital video. Now, I'm going to come back to this and explain how this works and how you can do this. But I want to point this out there because of the historical development. They still teach this workshop pattern to this day, and they use it all over the world. The BBC hired them to do 2 projects in Britain that are fantastic, where they just went to small towns and big towns in Britain and said, tell us your personal stories. Now we have a kind of ethnography of 1990s Britain, which is pretty interesting. It works because if I walk into a room of people who are not Martin, I'm going to keep picking on you, sorry, people who are not technology experts, and say, I'm going to talk to you about digital video, I'll watch the shoulders, and the shoulders will go up a little bit. Because digital video is a little challenging. If I say I'm going to talk to you about storytelling, everybody relaxes. That's it's a language hack, but it totally works. It's also about personal connections. People make stories about themselves. And this has grown into a huge movement. So you might know StoryCorps from NPR. That's one option of it. I'm not 100% fan, but 98% fan, because for me they do too much work for the people. People should be doing more of the technology work themselves, but I'm picky that way. But they go around, they have personal stories that are just beautiful. So in 2003, I was working with this nonprofit that you mentioned earlier, and we thought, well, could we use digital storytelling in education? The answer was absolutely. People were crazy about it. So we came up with our own version of it, where we allow people to do non-personal narratives. So we go to a bunch of faculty and say, well, what would you like to do as a story? And someone would say, oh, I want to do a story about coming out of the closet. Another person would say, I want to do a story about South African politics and why it's important. Okay, we want to have both of those stories in the same room at the same time. That worked. And we also let them do other technologies, and we let them focus on campuses, because we have people who want to do a campus story. Sometimes about a library. Well, we had an IT department who did an epic story about getting students to use IT policies that actually worked. It was pretty funny. And we did one of these every 2 weeks for about a year. People were really interested in this. And we weren't the only ones. There are tons of educational uses. There are educational, you can get a degree from Bowling Green or from the University of Houston in digital storytelling as an undergrad or as a master's program. If you go through the web right now, stop listening to me and just Google digital storytelling education, digital storytelling rubric, digital storytelling assessment, you will find tons of PDFs, of PowerPoint presentations, people just talking with us and sharing examples. It's been going on for a while. And people who do this tend to get pretty evangelical. Why? Why use storytelling? Well, let me ask you before I explain this weird diagram. Where do you guys use storytelling in your teaching and learning right now? Not digital storytelling, but where do you use story?
I guess in teaching religious history, trying to, talk about conflict and talk about, the emotions that might be behind certain events or people, so that students have some kind of connection as not just,
That's
laying
good.
there. So trying to personalize it, if it's a big, sweeping, history thing, trying to, imagine like what would a person in this particular subject position, like how would they react to this or think about this?
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
That's very historical pedagogy too. What would it be like to be confronted with the rise of Hitler or whatever? If you're trying to explain, say, let me go out of my depth here, early Buddhism split into greater and lesser vehicle. It's a Mahayana Theravada, am I right?
Yes.
Okay.
But this is well out of my wheelhouse.
But if you want to explain it, or your Christianity, right? So if you want to explain, say, the rise of the Protestant Reformation, all the different sects there, you might want to story it so that people hear that, the emotional connection, the personal connection. How about the rest of you guys? Yeah, please.
Well, two things. I use storytelling a lot when I'm talking about activism, so how various communities perceived some kind of threat to them and responded to it.
Yeah.
Especially because I feel like we're kind of in an age where students think activism is like door knocking and things they don't want to be involved in, and so letting them see what might prompt somebody to get involved on a particular issue. And the other thing, which is totally down another line, but I think of theory as storytelling, and I encourage my students to think of theory as storytelling. So we have phenomenon that we want to explain. What's a narrative that seems to fit with the data that you're looking at? Brilliant.
So for you, social phenomenon, the rise of a movement or a transformation of society, industrialism or industrialization, and a narrative is that's beautiful. No, that's great. So in my field in literature, it's the opposite. For us, theory is the death of story. It's the kind of extinction of story. But we should use it to explain something. That's great.
But theories are like, especially somebody was saying earlier, talking about like the kind of history and philosophy of science, like a science studies approach, right? Is thinking about theory as a text to explain particular phenomenon that can shift and change over time.
So they got
Not
the
the
transfer.
phenomena, but the explanations.
Yes, that's very tricky to do, but yes. So does this make sense as a something? Yeah, please.
I was just going to add, I teach Pacific Seminar, a required senior seminar, and the students are asked to do an ethical autobiography. So they're telling their own story. And that's a really different kind of
Yes.
way to use story to teach, but it's effective.
Yeah, I'm sure your students respond well to that. Because we all like ourselves to some extent. The autobiography really matters to us. So you already have this, and there's actually plenty of scholarship about storytelling in education and how to use stories. And we've been talking about you as professors making stories. Having the students make stories is also a very powerful thing to do. I've asked math professors if they ask their students to talk about their experiences with math, because we have the problem math phobia. And would that be able to help students feel better about doing trigonometry and calculus? I'm not sure if they can. This is
In my experience, it does. I've taught math, and I've had students do that.
Great. Great.
You could feel like the anxiety just drop as everybody realized everybody had their story about, it's like, oh, okay, you're scared too.
That's sweet. Good.
Yeah.
So we have this. Story is a pedagogical tool. Here's this is actually a pretty clear diagram, I think. I was joking before. If you think about abstract symbolic knowledge, so deconstruction, literary theory, calculus, Mahayana Buddhism, we can turn that into narrative, as we're just talking about that. We can also make this into embodied knowledge. So how does it impact you? Learning math, or in your seminar. Is your seminar in American history, or is it just an interdisciplinary seminar?
There's 40-some different sections, and all students take it. So, no, interdisciplinary.
Is that the freshman or senior seminar?
That's the senior.
Okay. And you can move back and forth along this line. So I'm going to race through a section right now because I'm conscious of time and I want to get ahead to pedagogy. Everything I've been talking about is historical, not projected into the future. So a couple of things have happened recently in the past 15 years that make this even bigger. And we talked a little bit about this, so let me just quickly go through this. One of the reasons social media is so powerful is because we use it for storytelling. And people don't usually think about this, but the minute you put it together, you can really feel it. This is a few other examples. This is the Facebook one of Shakespeare's play Titus Andronicus that has a Facebook post. On the left is a War of the Worlds narrative told through Twitter. On the right is a voice-thread story with kids' art. But let me explain a little bit. One of the first examples from 2003 was a blog purported to be by a woman who had just left her husband. Her husband is an organized crime figure, and she wants help. And so all the posts are, I'm on the run, I burned my passport, how do I survive? And when you read the comments, half of the comments are treating this very seriously, saying, well, don't use any credit cards, only use cash, or use a fake name. The other half are like, come on, are you for real? And this went on for a few months. I'm not going to tell you what it really was, but it was a narrative, just like a diary is a narrative that we understand. There are many examples of this. In fact, some of us have been taking pre-existing documents and republishing them through a blog to take advantage of that chronological structure. So for example, I don't know if any of you have read Dracula as an adult. If you haven't, you've got to go back and read it. It's a wild, insane book. No movie has ever done it justice. Seriously, it's a strange book. It's a scrapbook. The first page of it says, this is a scrapbook. There's a bunch of documents, and they're all organized by time. And so the first entry is from the 2nd of May. We don't know the year. The last is from the first week of November. It's in perfect chronological order. And we have diary entries. We have newspaper clippings. There's actually a receipt. There are transcripts of wax cylinder recordings. It's like an X-Files episode, but without any narrative structure. But you get to impose it by following it through. So I was preparing an edition for press, took the whole thing, published it on the web on the date of every event. So the first year I did this was 2010, May 2nd, Jonathan Harker. I'm heading east from Bistritz. I'm heading towards Castle Dracula. Dear Mina, I ate this awesome chicken dinner. You should try making this, and so on. I had hundreds of comments. People wrote this up in MSNBC. People linked to it. People who had never read the book before were asking comments like, how is Mina going to survive this? People who had read it before were offering ideas. The 2 leading Dracula scholars in the world came and added things. One said, yeah, I was looking at the manuscript. You should have this little part here. People have done this with other documents as well. Ulysses, Leonardo da Vinci's diaries. This screenshot here is from the New York Times, which reran the U.S. Civil War using New York Times documents. 150 years to the day, every single day. Here's another example. If you don't know Tumblr, Tumblr is a blogging tool. It's stripped down and very essentially focused on images. This is a Tumblr called We Are the 99%. The way it worked was you would submit a content to this. The content would be a photo. In the photo would be you and a sign describing your relationship to the We Are the 99% concept. So this is almost 10 years ago. And then they would publish it. And I use these excerpts from this blog when I talk to people who think technology doesn't work for them or that technology has no emotional impact. So this is one. My dad died from cancer at the age of 44. We were still paying off his law school debt loans. We are the 99%. And can you see her lip on the top of the screen? And the hand? This is just a little bit. This is not a professional grade anything. I mean, I think we are still paying off his law school loans. And this hits you right in the heart, because you can understand how this could work. Here's another one. I'm 71 and well off, but the economic woes of others impacts my well-being. We are linked to one another, and only as strong as the weakest among us. I, too, am the 99%. Now, look at her face. I would say this is a snapshot verging on a story, and the emotional connection of this is powerful. So you can do this with blogs. This is the White House asked people in 2012 to submit digital stories about the campaign. So this is a big moment for us in digital storytelling. You know, we've reached a certain level right now. But let me show you a few other examples. Twitter. How many of you are on Twitter? How many of you are tweeting now? Okay, good. I actually feel nervous that I'm not on Twitter now. I miss it. It's like, you know, closing your ears. I mean, I want to. You can do lots of things with Twitter. We can talk about Twitter all day. One thing you can do is you can tell stories with it. And this might be a challenge, although a lot you probably did something like this in creative writing. 140 characters. Can you tell a story there? Absolutely. Shortest, saddest sci-fi story. Robot looking for signs of life has broken down a New Zealand coal mine. Complete story. Single tweet. Ernest Hemingway famously had the 6-word short story. Do you know this one? For sale, baby shoes, never used.
Yeah.
There's contests to do that. Do a story in 6 words. That's if you're just starting off. The 4-word storytelling, that's even harder. But Twitter forces you to be that concise. But you can do other things as well. You can have a contest, or you can organize people to use a hashtag and tweet about an event. So this is a pretend alien invasion. And so people use the same hashtag, Solcoms, and you can just follow this through. A bunkering down here, most of the country can only find Iowa once every 4 years. That'd be the safest place ever. Oh God, everyone fleeing, and so on. Kind of like Orson Welles' War of the Worlds. Right? You can do round robin storytelling by giving everybody access to the same Twitter handle, and they take turns. So this is from a 6th grade class. And they built this epic, crazy 6th grade story using Twitter. And this is not fiction. Helicopter hovering above Abbottabad at 1 a.m. You guys recognize this? Go away, helicopter, before I take out my giant swatter. A huge window shaking bang here in Abbottabad, Kenton. I hope it's not the start of something nasty. The very bottom. The few people online this time of night are saying one of the coppers was not Pakistani. This is the death of Osama bin Laden. Right. And a guy in the town was live tweeting it and didn't know it. This is a historical document. It's a story. Incontestably, this is a story in Twitter form. And you can add other things to it. You can see the responses by other people. So what do you guess? Any casualties, exact location, and so on? And this happens all the time. People live tweet different events. And you can use aphorisms. There are a lot of Twitter accounts where people just take the 140 characters as a dare to have not a story, but a statement. You know, and aphorisms go back to maybe the 17th century by the classical period. You know, it is heroic to try to stop time. You're guileless in your dreams, and so on. Yeah, there are about 4 different Oscar Wilde accounts. Yes, of course. And a bunch of Jane Austen fans, who are always productive, actually use Twitter to create a Jane Austen fan novel. So they use the hashtag A4T, and we're able to put this all completely together. I'm not a Jane Austen fanatic or scholar. I can't assess the quality of it. They were happy. I'm okay with it. Facebook for storytelling. Well, in a sense, that's what Facebook is, a series of personal stories. And here's one from the library world, not too far from here. Reno, actually. University of Nevada, Reno library went into their archives and got details about documents about students who went there who are now dead, 100 years ago students, and then made Facebook pages for them. And what's fun, so you guys might like this, is there's a couple. So you see the bottom, Joe McDonald, the very, very bottom, he had an account, Lil Lewis had an account, and they got married afterwards. Facebook closed these accounts because they were fake, and then reopened them because they're such nice stories. A Polish Holocaust museum built an account for a boy who perished in World War II, using all the documents they had for him, making it into a story to make it live for people. Here's a Joe McDonald one.
Have you seen the Frederick Douglass Twitter?
Yes. Yes.
The what?
Okay, explain.
So Trump had some comments about Frederick Douglass and his Black History Month address that seemed to have implied that he might not have known who Frederick Douglass was. And so there's now a Frederick Douglass Twitter account where he talks about his life and trolls Donald Trump.
Which is awesome.
It's really funny.
Occidental College has, if I can talk about Southern California, not get in trouble too much. A great American poet lived there, and they have his papers, and they've been tweeting out lines of his verse because they're perfect. They're really, really concise. And the background art they have for it is some of the stuff that he actually built. I'm sorry, it's hard to see this. This is actually hard to display. This is Hamlet by Facebook. Horatio thinks he saw a ghost. Hamlet thinks it's annoying when your uncle marries your mother after your dad dies. The king thinks Hamlet's annoying. Laertes thinks Ophelia can do better. Hamlet's father is now a zombie. The king poked the queen. The queen poked the king back. Hamlet and the queen are no longer friends. And you can do many of these. Right? It's a joke, but it works. This is a Jane Austen novel. Charles Bingley's buying a house, and so on. You can find many examples of this. And I've got lots of these online to show you. But I want to. Can you tell a story with wikis? There are two successes I can point you to. One of them is academic, and one of them actually works. Here's the academic one. Penguin Publishing asked the human race to tell a collaborative story through wikis. This is the biggest collaborative storytelling project I've ever heard of, I think maybe in human history. And it's a lousy story. It's really bad. And halfway through telling the story, a bunch of people tried to hijack it and make it into a comedy. So they split the story in half. And they fork the entire novel, and you have both of these. So it actually does exist. I mean, it is a complete story. I just think it's pretty lousy, but it's there. Also online, if you missed the X-Files, there's a website called the SCP Wiki, which purports to be the bureaucratic documents of an agency called SCP, which looks for paranormal events and secures them. It's all written in bureaucratese. It's very, very dry, absolutely hilarious and creepy. And it really works as a storytelling device. So we can use wikis. Yeah, please.
And so for this, so technically, tell me how this functions. So and somebody composes a section, and then it's open to editing, as in Wikipedia, and you can see who is making the edits. And so they just put it together.
And they just added more and added more and added more.
And could you see how many contributors were doing it? Was it really a multiple?
Yeah, there's a couple academic papers on this right now, and it's. I mean, that's why it's an academic success.
And they didn't know each other. I mean, it was. I mean, do we know that?
As far as we can tell.
Right, they're just okay.
See, Penguin did it because they're a planetary publisher that's so well known. They have large reach.
Yeah.
I mean, if my daughter launched it, it would be her friends who would do it. Right. But this is a global thing. It's cool. Fascinating to think about. Well, you can think about, say, I mean, you do world history. How far back do you go in your claim? Everything.
Big Bang.
Okay. That's it. All right. So you think about oral traditions.
Right.
And you think about this in religion too. You think about how those are multi-authored stories in some sense.
Right.
But this is the biggest one. Well, let me go further. You can find other platforms that people have used. Storytelling by podcast. Just so you know, I love being able to say "I told you so." Right? The term podcast dates back to 2004. A reporter in The Guardian published an article saying, well, what if you could do stories with MP3 players on the iPod? We'll call them podcasts. And we still use the term, even though no one uses MP3 players anymore. And up until about 2015, this was a really minor niche field. And then the US, an NPR spinoff, did a show called Serial, which probably half of you have heard of. And then suddenly, we had another big bang for audiobooks for podcasts. People love making podcasts, and there are tons of them, of all kinds. They're hugely popular, which makes me very happy. And they work if you talk to old radio guys, I think this is pretty cute. Wow, you figure out we can tell stories with sound. Yep, we've heard about that. And there are a lot of echoes of it. I mean, like NPR does this. There's not coincidentally, they're a radio station. This is a BBC story. BBC knows all about radio storytelling, right? But there are a lot of users are making stories the first time. We can talk about that if you want. Let me show you some nice images, and then let's work on education. Flickr is a website where you can share images, photos that you take. It's pretty small, maybe about 3 billion photos right now. Not as big as Instagram, unfortunately, but it's pretty rich. And you can do things with those photos. You can make them into collections. So here's a group collection called Tell a Story in 5 Frames. So you take 5 images, put them in a sequence, give them a title, and that's it. Nothing else. No footnotes, no paragraphs. That's the whole story. It's a nice prompt. I recommend giving this. You don't need a computer for this. You can do it with a magazine if you want. Just a computer makes it a lot easier. So here are a couple of examples. This story is called The Chase. 5 pictures, right? Just picture 1. Picture 2. Picture 3. Picture 4. Picture 5. So if you want to go back to that Freytag triangle, here's exposition, rising action, climax, denouement, right? And you've got characters. Here's another one. This is one I've used a lot. And this is not by me, by the way. It's by some guy called Eli the Bearded. I've never met him. I don't know who he is. It's called Farm to Food. And it doesn't use his own photos. I'll show you why. Farm to Food. First image. These are historical photographs from the Library of Congress. Second image. Can you see this photo okay? Yeah, okay, sorry. It's not the best photograph. 3. 4. Photo 5. I look at this story about once a month, and I have to resist crying at times. Because for me, this strikes me as incredibly powerful. There's no fictional character made up. There's not a lot of continuity of characters, although I think those 2 boys are these 2 boys here. And it tells a story. So you wonder, as a pedagogical assignment, to ask your students to do this. 5 is a good number. It's a Monty Python number, right? The Holy Hagrid of Antioch, count to 5, the number of the counting trumpet, right? But 5 is a good number, but 4 or 10 or whatever, and ask your students to make a story in almost any subject. So you want to describe, say, how did industrialism happen, right? Think of images for this, factory, a train, a farm, that kind of thing. And you can do this for creative writing, obviously. So there are a lot of ways to do this. I'm going to talk about gaming another time, because you can tell stories of gaming. It's really amazing. It's huge. It's the world's 2nd biggest culture industry, bigger than radio, TV, and movies combined. It's huge, absolutely interesting. Talk about it later. Oh, God, there's so much to it. But I want to talk about, instead, how you get to use this stuff. Right? So here are a couple of questions you need to begin with. One of them is, who produces these stories? I'm using the term producing very carefully, because I want you to think about who's making the story, but also in the movie, TV producing sense, who's helping put everything together. So, I'm sorry, can you tell me your name? Edie. So Edie mentioned her example of the students doing autobiographical stories in her seminar. So are the students going to be making it? Or if you're, Allison?
Yeah.
Okay, so if Allison's talking about, you're narrating a story, saying, well, okay, here's Marx's explanation of alienation of labor, and this explains these different things happening in factories and so on. So she's telling a story. But then if you do this digitally, are you going to do this entirely yourself? You can. Are you going to have somebody help you? You can. So will it be Martin? Will it be Mark? Will it be the entire library staff? Will it be students helping you? That's the question you have to ask and answer before you go further. Second one is, do you want personal or impersonal stories? I'm not trying to be coy here. You might want personal stories. Well, obviously you use them, right? Teaching religion, I've only taught religion a couple of times. For me, it's kind of like mixing guns and whiskey. I'm always nervous about it. But asking students for their personal stories, yeah, it might work, it might not. Or do you want impersonal? Or do you want impersonal stories, right? So do you want to have a student do a narrative from Jeremiah, for example, focusing on that by itself?
Right.
Another is, again, who supports, and you have to take that question pretty seriously. You want to think about who's going to be, if you have students making videos, for example, who's going to be owning the video cameras, or the students going to be using their own cell phones? Who's going to be holding the files? Questions you have to answer. So I've got a workflow model, and this works pretty well, I think. So when you begin, preparation is huge for this. You want to think about the curricular connection of this, what it connects to. Some of these are obvious, I'm sorry, but I want to have them all on the table, especially because when we talk about technology, we can focus on the technology and lose sight of everything else because technology is exciting and cool. You want to think about the pedagogical integration. So are you doing something constructivist? Are you trying to have students role play a historical character? Are you trying to say, forgive me for saying this, humanize data, to make it more approachable and accessible? Are you trying? You want to think about the pedagogical angle. You also want to integrate into the syllabus. Well, that sounds obvious. People don't always do this, and you want to think about how this could structure. For example, a dear friend of mine teaching writing at Middlebury College wanted to have her students make digital videos. And the reason she did was pedagogical. She found that her students, she tended to get A students. And she hated their writing, because their writing was boring. Their writing was clearly students who have always gotten A's in English, and the students didn't care about the writing. It was kind of arid and soulless. She wanted them to rethink their writing. So she gave them an assignment to make a video that couldn't use any language, just images and sound. Blew their minds. Fantastic. But she had to put it in the syllabus. So 1 week, this is the assignment, here's why. The next week, here's our discussion of it. Pretty basic. The next year she did this. She loved the results, but she wanted to try something completely different. So it was an Irish literature class. A couple weeks in, she had her students make a 1-minute video. That was it, capped at 60 seconds. Then they had, the next week, a writing assignment reflecting on that. 2 weeks later, they'd make a 5-minute video. And then pieces of the syllabus addressed this. Then the end of the semester, their term paper had an option of doing a larger video. Again, built completely into the syllabus. It sounds obvious, but you've got to build this in. Platform selection. What are you going to make this stuff on? Are you going to do audio only? Are you going to do Flickr? Are you going to do video? Pick that ahead of time. And then again, figure out who you're going to exploit. I mean, who's going to support you as you make all this happen. One key support thing to think about, and I don't know Pacific well enough, I'm sorry, is to have students peer support each other. I found a lot of schools, if you have a class of, how big is your seminar? Is it capped at what, 16? 25. 25, okay. So for a class of 25, I bet you will have 2 students who will be pretty good at some of the technology. So do you want to build that into the class? And pick them out in the first week of class, who's good at this? And then maybe give them credit or give them something else. Or do you want to have another student group help this out? Maybe you have a video club, that kind of thing. During the class, a couple of key things to do. One is explaining what it's about. It doesn't happen all the time. You want to explain what the project is and why you're doing it. So if you're going to have students do autobiographies, explain why. What does that have to do with chemistry or with statistics or with French? You also want to have assessment, of course. Now, assessment is easier than it sounds because we've already been doing this before. If a student makes an audio story, if they make a Flickr sequence, if they make a poster, if they make a movie, well, in the sciences, we've been assessing student posters forever. And in the humanities, we've been assessing writing forever. You're basically doing the same thing. Do they make an argument? Are they using the evidence you want? Is it coherent? Does it fulfill the requirements of the assignment? You can break this down. And then, much like writing, you assess grammar, perhaps, or footnoting. In a poster, you assess layout. In a video, you assess timing, sound, all these other things. And there are plenty of examples of assessment rubrics online. I can share some with you. Many, many of these. Personal note, I think having a group presentation of the work is great. People respond really well to it. They love being able to show their movie or their poster or their audio clip to make it real to all the other students. You'll be surprised, and the students will surprise each other with their depths and what they're capable of doing. A very, very sober student may make a hilarious string of images. A very funny student may do something heartbreakingly serious, and so on. Now, this is the Center for Digital Storytelling method. And so let me just show you how this works. This is the big one, the most well established. Again, this is a serious time commitment. I've managed to do this in a day and a half. That's a bit freakish. They assign 3 full days, so that's 3 8-hour days. So you might want to devote that much time, you might want to spread it out in some way, but let me just work you through it. So what they have is students in this curriculum begin with a story idea. That's all they've got. I want to tell a story about my grandfather from Russia. Okay. Then they have to write the voiceover. Now, the reason you have to write this is because almost nobody can do a good voiceover without any notes. It's really, the people who can do this, shoot them. I hate them so much. But otherwise, you have to write it. And I think it's a good idea to give students some examples of writing frameworks. So you might want to do the Hollywood story, script idea, something like that. Okay. I often do a table. So I have one column is words that will be spoken out loud. The next column is the image or images I want to go with it. The next column is any sounds I want to go with it. That works for me. That works for some people. Other people just write paragraphs. Okay. Use a pen, use Microsoft Word, whatever works. Whatever gets people writing a voiceover. But they have to record it. And again, that's the hardest thing. Not technologically, just emotionally. My advice to you is to have students read it once, one single sound file. Don't break up the sound file. Just have one single sound file. It's like 2.5 minutes long or 3 minutes long. Record that, play it back, have somebody else hear it and say that's good enough and move on. You might want to record it another time, but like the SAT, it doesn't get that much better the second time. It really just works mostly the first time. And then they get them to move on. This is the one where you have to be a disciplinarian, because people will get stuck on this. They'll hate the sound of their voice. They'll record it in different ways. I had one French professor, took her 3-minute video, cut it into 60 sections. Didn't label the sections. It was madness. But once you've got that story, that audio file becomes the spine of the story. That's what everything hangs on.
Bryan, what would be the main program that people use to record an audio file and save it and then
around the world, people often use a program called Audacity. Because it's free, it's an easy download. It works on Mac and PC, and it simply works. I can show you to you if you want. It's pretty easy to get. You guys have Media Site. You have a site license for Pacific, and you should be able to record audio into that. Use that. Okay. Because if everyone's got that and you've already paid for it, use it up. Right. And then on cell phones, there's tons of audio recording tools of all kinds. Are you in the Mac universe by any chance?
I'm not.
It's okay. There's a Mac-only program, and I love it. Apple doesn't love it, and no one has ever copied it. It's too bad. It's called GarageBand. And one of the things that's great about it is it comes with, I don't know the term for this from musical theory, I think of it a boatload, of copyright-free audio clips of all kinds of sounds and music. So you can record your audio and just have, but if you don't use it, don't worry about it. Okay.
Thanks.
No, good question. And I have to follow up with the question because then you take this into a video editor. There are a few video editor programs out there. And the Apple side, there's 2. The easier one is called iMovie. The harder one is called Final Cut.
Right.
Final Cut is what Hollywood uses to make movies. I mean, it's the industrial strength one. So if you're thinking about students, pushing them towards jobs, Final Cut is one of the great ones. It's a lot harder, but you can use it. On the PC side, we have Adobe Premiere. And we also have a free tool called Windows Movie Maker, which is free and works. Just use the thing; it's great.
Do you have access to Final Cut? And anyone on campus can use it?
Yeah, you can lab.
Oh, okay.
And do you know what that is?
I know what it is. I'm more interested in things I can use on my own.
Absolutely. And do you have iMovie on there?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, well, use iMovie for start. It's harder than it used to be.
Yeah.
But it is
harder than it used to be.
But still, it's a good basic tool. And on the Windows side, Movie Maker is good. Why are we talking about this? If you're not necessarily shooting video, because you can take the video editor, insert the audio file, add images to it, and then you're done if you want. It's a narrated series of images. Well, that's kind of what a movie is. I mean, that really works. It's also a film strip. Right? It could also be a PowerPoint recorder, but that simply works. And video editors are good for that because you can add other things to it. People often want to add music. This is where the librarians were here to help you, because when I say you want to add music to your stories, lawyers call this rampant copyright violation, because it often is. People go, oh, I'll use a Beatles song, that won't be a problem. Oh, stop, it's an issue. There are many, many ways around this. Your librarians are here to help you navigate the thorny fields of copyright law and practice, and they can show you how to get around it. If you want, I could talk about this, but I want to keep moving on. Students will edit and edit more. So, for example, the first story I did was a story about this book that scared me. Right? So I recorded my voiceover talking about it, and had all these great images. The book, by the way, was H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, illustrated by Edward Gorey. If you don't know Gorey, if you ever saw the TV show Mystery on PBS, he did the credits for it. And the book is, oh my God, is it creepy. It's so good. It's a great novel, but it's also beautifully illustrated. I read this in 4th grade. Scared me so much I threw the book in a closet. My first overdue book. 6 months later, 2 decades later, and in my 20s, I'm working at a used bookshop. The book comes across the desk. I still had that feeling. I have a copy now. It was still beautiful, right? So I recorded my voiceover and had all these images of the book, and then I started messing with them. So, like, what image goes with what part of what sentence? And then then I found a recording of Orson Welles' War of the Worlds. I snuck that in the background so you could hear Orson Welles talking in the background. And then I edited it. I added the sound volumes and played with it back and forth. You can dive into the technical details as long as you like. As teachers, your job is to make sure that people come out of that depth. You give them a deadline and a schedule so they can just get it done. Because the technology is seductive. People will want to dive in and edit like mad. And if you don't think that happens, think about writing a dissertation or a book. There are 2 more things about this that are social. When the story is done, I don't mean it's Spielberg quality perfection. I mean, when it's done, when it's viewable and listenable and watchable, that's fine. That's what you need. You have to figure out how to share it. Now, the Center for Digital Storytelling, which is now called Story Center, their method is to burn it onto a DVD. They use it for a couple of reasons. Psychologically, it feels good to have a physical object out of your digital work. That counts for a lot. So when we're teaching this workshop, we'll do this. We'll teach them how to use iDVD to burn discs or whichever program. Then we have a stack of these at the front, and we do a movie festival for an hour, show them all their movies. Very emotional, very powerful. You may just want to share it online with YouTube. We actually spent a while developing a lesson on YouTube. We're explaining to people. They skip the lesson, just put it on YouTube anyway. Why would you not want to do that on YouTube? Copyright. Because maybe when your students are learning how to do this, maybe you let them get away with some copyright infringements just to figure out the technology. You might not want them to share that Madonna song, okay? Or if it's a personal story. If it's a story about, if I did a story about my grandfather, I share it because I'm shameless. But maybe I don't want to. Okay. But do the story circle. This may sound odd for someone who works with technology a lot, but to have people stop touching the computers for a minute and get around in a circle. 25 is a little bit too big. I would max it at 20 to have students talk to each other about their story. And you can prompt them. Day 2. How's your story coming? What's working for you and what's the challenge you need? And they go around. And this is fantastic because students reinforce each other. They'll say, oh, you're having a problem with voiceover? I can help you with that. I was in one workshop where a French professor was doing something and needed a different voice from hers to do an English language thing, so she brought me in. It was great fun. Worked like a charm. Students validate each other, and then they all feel they're on the same page. What's hard is getting them to stop using the technology. And by them, I mean you. You have to physically get people to stop losing the laptops and move around. I actually took one class at Bowdoin College, marched them out of a lab, down a hall, into an abandoned closet, and we sat around and talked to each other. And again, these are people who are 40, 50, 60 years old. So here are a few other things to think about your workflow. So capturing and assembling media. So when you make a voiceover, for example, or if you write a story down, in copyright terms, that is your property. You made that. It comes out of your brain. That's yours. That's fine. But you will also want to use stuff from other people. So you want to think about those other images, those other sound files, video clips, and how they could work. So I'll give you an example.
The United States is where they can feel safe. My relatives have hope in me. They have hope for what they think the future guarantees here. For me, my mother language is what makes me feel at peace. It's Arabic. I feel like I owe Arabic everything. In Syria, my favorite class at school was Arabic literature. I used to write essays and read them aloud in class. Here, they make me take English, which I don't really like. Sometimes, I feel like I'm losing the connection to my language, my heritage. In San Francisco Main Library, there is a section for Arabic books. I just like to look at them and read their titles. They fascinate me. I try to read books on my own in Arabic, but I'm not so good at writing anymore. I have a friend who also came from Syria, and she has a 7-year-old brother. Their mother brought books in Arabic for him to read, but in the US, everything is in English, and he has forgotten the formal Arabic Fusha. He tells me he doesn't like to watch Arabic cartoon movies I suggest, because he doesn't understand what the characters are saying. His mother wants to teach him, but she never has the time. My parents are teachers of Arabic literature, but they don't have the time now either to teach me. My father and I talk about Arab authors, musicians, singers, poets. Just 2 days ago, I was singing a song, and he shared the history of it, and who wrote it. My father just talks with me for pleasure, but he doesn't realize how much those conversations mean. When I listen to him, I feel protected, empowered. I feel at home. ده القلب يحب مرة ما يحبش مرتين.
Can you see the credits, okay?
ما يحبش مرتين ما يحبش مرتين.
In the interest of time, let me quickly show you how this example embodies what I've been talking about. Just pedagogically, with your students, I would recommend showing them 2 of these Story Center videos and ask them to react and walk them through it and see what they find. So let me just show you a couple of things. First, we have embedded videos. So these are presumably ones that either the creator shot herself or that she grabbed from somebody else. This is a photo. It's slightly animated. So you can see it moves up. In the iMovie program from Apple, this is called the Ken Burns effect. Because the documentarian Ken Burns, his first movie, The Civil War, was so long and he didn't have enough photos. They just had to draw out a lot of photos. But he's good at it. So there's, for example, a photo of Abraham Lincoln and his General George McClellan standing next to each other, looking pissed at each other. McClellan is about half the height of Lincoln. So the animation vertically goes up the photo, drawing attention to it. But if you have a crowd of people, he'll pan across. Right? So here's a photo. Maybe she took this photo, maybe not. More video. More video. Another photo. Okay. Now, beyond that,
I talk about Arab authors,
her voiceover, right?
musicians, singers.
By the way, just how did the voiceover affect you? Good, bad, powerful, weak? What do you think? Just
Powerful.
yeah. Why? Is she a professional speaker?
No. It's very genuine.
Yes. Yeah. Gardner Campbell calls this the gift of voice. And again, with audio, we don't like our sound, but my God, it impacts other people. You know, if you hem and haw, cough, sneeze, it's real to somebody else. That audio is so powerful. And then also, do you hear underneath it?
It's poets.
The music?
Just 2 days ago, I was singing a song, and he shared the history of it. And
credits I'm asking about because people often forget them. not because we're bad people, but because we're busy. And you want to have credits citing sources. We do this in academia. That's where bibliographies are, right? That's what footnotes are, to teach this for the students. And here, you'll see, she's got her name and the people involved and where this came from. Does that make sense as an example of a story?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, give me a second. There's more that we can talk about this, but we're closing in on the noon hour, and if I get between you and your food, that would be deadly. So let me just point out a couple of other tools that you can use to make digital stories. Here's one of them, PowerPoint. It works. I mean, it's a tool that's ubiquitous, and people want to have. Here's another one. This is a Vermont product, so I never get to say this, right? I mean, our big product is like Ben & Jerry's, right, or maple syrup, which I've made, right? But this is a technology product. This is called Cowbird, and this is nifty. I really recommend trying this out yourself. With cowbird.com, like cow and bird. And so here's some of the stories that I've made. Let me just show you a couple of these. So what this lets you do is this lets you take images and anything else you want and stick them into one spot and make a story. All right, so here's one I call Portentously Thunder Comes Up the Mountainside. So here's a photo. I didn't animate it, I just uploaded it. But I can, as a viewer, I can move this around and see this. Here's a page of text I typed in. If you want, I feel embarrassed reading it out loud right now, but because this is about a storm, it was pretty exciting. That was it. So ask your students to do that as an assignment. Give them a picture, or have them find a picture, and then add more. The most popular one I ever did is actually a global financial crisis story called The Night We Almost Ate the Bankers. This is a true story. It's really, I think, hilarious and awkward. And I got into so much trouble talking to the development offices for a certain college, and I showed this to them. But this is longer. This is 10 screens. So here's one photo, text, another photo, text, 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 too much text, God, too much text, all right, and photo. So if you want to make one, you just go to tell a story, have a title, One Day on the West Coast, a group of brilliant faculty terrified a quiet young man from Vermont. Okay, and then for photos, I'll have to find something. So let me just quickly grab one off the web.
So in terms of copyright and photos, do you mainly recommend you try Flickr, or are there other places to go?
No, that's a good question. Hang on one second. Let me just pull this out.
There's Shutterstock.
Yeah. There's a lot of different options. So let me just show you the technical thing here. So I just grabbed one image here, and then I'm going to upload this. It has to ingest it. So let's go to the story. And here's this photo. There, done. And I could save this so nobody else gets to see it ever again. So I can save it, and so I can come back to it and add to it. Or I can hit publish. If I published it, it gives me a link, and I can embed it anywhere else I want. Copyright stuff is a challenge, but it's a meetable one. Librarians here can point you to a ton of resources. So I like to go to Flickr and use the Creative Commons search. They only have about 85 million photos that way. So it may or may not have what I want, but it's a good way to do it. I also use for audio, because audio I think is so powerful, I use a wonderful site called Freesound, which just has sound effects and sounds. movies have actually cited this. You can find them cited in Hollywood films now. But you basically go through this and you search for, let's see, thunder. Okay, here's one. That's okay. Let me use this one. Oh yeah. Yeah, that does it. Download that. So I'll use that. But I'm sure you guys at the library, you have plenty of resources you can point people to. It's an issue. Copyright is a pain right now. But the other thing is, when I showed you that farm to food story, that was Library of Congress photos that the Library of Congress had published to the web under Creative Commons license because they wanted people to use them. And they want people to annotate them because some of those photos were they received them as gifts, but they didn't have metadata about them. So they put them out saying, please, if you recognize this town or these people, let us know. And they got some feedback, which is pretty handy. A bunch of museums and libraries have been doing this. So in your in statistics, wow, my God, there's so many images you can make and give. So that counts for a lot. Other questions? Oh man, you don't be stunned. Don't give me that stunned budgie look. Is this useful for you?
Very. Personally and professionally.
Oh, good. Well, it really cuts across both. Let me just say, as a meta note, we can talk about this forever because this is so rich. But I would love to hear what you do. So if you get to use this for your education classes, for statistics, for anything you do, let me know how it goes. Or tell Mark, or tell anybody here, and I would love to find out.